Hey everybody, it's Matt. Hope you all are having a good Saturday. And with all the upheaval and controversy in the VC lately, I thought it'd be fun to just forget that and do a review because it's been a while since I've done one. The Beach Boys, I'm going to keep those going. I had reviewed all the first four albums and want to do that chronologically. So I don't have the fifth album yet. That's out. Of course, they're all out, but the label that's re-releasing those has released the fifth one, but they haven't released the next ones after that. So I want to wait and order the next three. They're supposed to be coming out later this year. So I will get that. I mean, I could just find a good used version of those albums, but thought it'd be kind of neat to get a newly remastered mono editions of those with the nice thick sleeves and all that. So I'll be continuing the Beach Boys here. So stay tuned for that. But I wanted to do a review of another band since I've finished up with the Kinks and the Beach Boys is an ongoing thing. So I thought I would review since I do have all their albums. So I'll start with the first album, and that would be The Jam. And it's their debut album, In the City. There's the front. There's the back. Jam is Paul Weller, who wrote most of the songs, guitarist and singer. And then you got Rick Buckler, who was the drummer, and Bruce Foxton, who played bass. And these two guys would backup vocals. And Foxton wrote a song here and there, kind of like George Harrison and the Beatles. He wrote the occasional song. Weller wrote the majority of them, however, and was, for all intents and purposes, the leader of the band. I'll show you this too as the actual album. There's the label. Okay, so that's In the City. The album came out on May 20th, 1977, and it got to number 20 in England. Didn't do anything in America, unfortunately. The title song, In the City, was their first 45. That one, if I can read my handwriting here, came out on 77 in April 29th of 77 in England. Reached number 40. That's the debut single there. And all their singles were re-released in England 2 or 3 times, and so later on it actually reached number 36, so it surpassed its original chart placement on re-release, which is kind of a funny thing. But In the City would be their start of 18 consecutive top 40 hits in England, which included 4 number ones. And sadly, like I said, in America they didn't ever really chart or do anything. I think some of their albums might have charted in the lower reaches of the American charts, down like 150 or something, which is a crying shame, because they are probably my third favorite group of all time, behind the Beatles and the Kinks. And so yeah, I found out about the Jam. I had heard about them. I remember reading Trouser Press magazine back in 76, 77, so through the early 80s when it went out of business, that would talk about all these and have high praise for all these new wave and punk bands. And that's how I discovered a lot of those bands, because you heard about them, but they didn't get played on American radio back then, unfortunately, at least not in the Dallas-Fort Worth market. So just after reading about it, kind of the same thing with the Clash is how I found out about them, even though they later would have actual American airplay and hits. But I found out about them and got into them before Should I Stay or Should I Go and Rock the Casbah. But same with the Jam. I just had read about them in Trouser Press, and you'd read some in Cream magazine and stuff in that day. And so I finally took a chance on them. And what happened was in 82, the band, by the way, existed from 77 to 82 as far as recording. They were around a little before that, but the first single and album came out in 77. Paul Weller was all of 19 years old when the debut album came out. And so in '82, there was this radio station, KEGL, in Dallas, Fort Worth, which was just a crap station kind of thing that played like Barry Manilow and Muskrat Love and Torn Between Two Lovers, just, you know, stuff like that. And for some reason, it went in the summer of '82 to kind of a punk new wave format. It only lasted for about 3 months, but it was really great because all of a sudden you heard a lot of these bands, you know, the Squeeze and the Clash and Jam and Buzzcocks and Ramones and all that had never been played on radio here. So that was really fun. I wish it would have lasted, but it didn't. But so I'd heard about the Jam, and I was kind of interested in them from what I'd read. But again, this is back when you know, I was a teenager, so money was in short supply. So you kind of took chances on albums every once in a while, but you couldn't do that all the time. So when I heard a song that's not on this album, it's a later song of theirs that was #1 in England called Town Called Malice. I thought it was a really great song. They played it on a radio station several times, but they never said the name of it, and I wasn't sure what it was. I don't why, because Town Called Malice, they sing that in the song several times, so I don't know why I didn't know it was that. But anyway, so I went to the record store and bought a record. Didn't have that song on it, but it turned out to be one of my favorite records of all time. I know we'll get to that as we get, those are later records, but they quickly became one of my favorite bands there. So, yeah, what else to say about them? They were part of the whole punk rock explosion, and there's arguments as to whether they were punk rock or not. They kind of somewhat are, somewhat aren't. They didn't wear the safety pins and torn up t-shirts. They dressed in sort of suits and mod clothes from the kind of a 60-ish look, more early Who type, Small Faces type look. And but they had a lot of the angry energy and so forth, the punk. So I don't know, they just made a lot of great songs. And they say straight up front that this album, like I said, came out on May 20th of '77. It's a good album, and we'll go through the songs here in a minute, but it's not quite up to par with the debuts that also came out that same year. The Clash album came out April 8th that year, and the Sex Pistols' Nevermind the Bollocks, which came out, or Bollocks or Bullocks, however you say that. I'm not English, I don't know. I don't say that here too much. The Sex Pistols album came out October 27th of that year. And even though the Pistols album came out after the Jam's debut, the early Pistols 45s had come out before the Jam's first single or album. So they, the Jam, Paul Weller in particular, were heavily influenced by the Sex Pistols and the Clash and the Ramones. In addition to, he was a huge 60s fan, Beatles, Kinks, Small Faces, so forth. So yeah, the Clash album is not quite up to the level of those other two debuts. I mean, the first Clash album is just a classic. It's one of the greatest albums of all time, in my opinion, and just not a bad song on it. And the Sex Pistols album, I like a lot. It's really good. The Sex Pistols album was one of those benchmark albums, one of those event albums, kind of caught the zeitgeist of the time, even whether you like it or not. I mean, it's one of those important albums in the history of rock and roll. You know, I'm not saying it's as good or not as good, but I mean, it was one of those Sgt. Pepper moments, or one of those Elvis singing Heartbreak Hotel type moments. Not so much in America, but certainly in England. And so then the Clash's, the Jam's first album is not of that historical importance or anything, or cultural importance, even though it did have its own importance. But and the funny thing is, getting off the subject there for a second, the Sex Pistols album went to #1 in England, went to like number 120 in America, despite a lot of press and Cream, Trouser Press, even Rolling Stone, but it didn't do well in America and went to number 120. But nonetheless, it's a platinum album in America, which means it sold 1 million copies. So I don't know, it probably took years to do that, but I just thought that was kind of interesting. So yeah, the Jam found them. And the other thing, 77 to 82 is they broke up in 82. They released 6 studio albums. Kind of a funny aside to that is they've got 14 or 15 compilation albums, sort of like greatest hits and albums of B-sides and unreleased tracks and so forth. So they're in that funny position of having more compilation albums than they did actual albums of new music, which I always thought was kind of funny there. Um, Huge in England, didn't do anything in America. About the time that I discovered them, even though I had heard of them as far back as, I don't know, 78, 79, I never bought anything by them till 82, and like I said, fell in love with them immediately. And like I said, Beatles, Kinks, and Jam for me. And while I admit that in the broad overview of things, of the history of popular music and rock and roll, are they as important as the Rolling Stones or Jimi Hendrix or the Who? Probably not, even though they were gigantic in England culturally and chart success-wise and so forth. But no, probably not. But I just dig them and think their music is better. And I love the Rolling Stones and the Who and Jimi Hendrix, so there's no knock on them. But um, just a great band. And so the other thing is, some people out there in the VC, is Joe, me, and Mr. Mayo. Uh, I've seen some people show Jam albums, and so, but anyone who is a big '60s fan, like myself, who's loves the Beatles, Kinks, Who, Small Faces, Yardbirds, all that stuff, the whole British Invasion '60s music sound, would I think really love the Jam. If you listen to them and give them a chance, I think you would really like them. Um, they're not a slavish imitation of those bands, even though early on they kind of did model themselves after the Who and Small Faces and some of those bands. But they're their own band. They quickly got their own sound. And so yeah, if you're a '60s fan, if you're one of those people that they're not new music now because they've been gone for 30 years, but if you're one of those not much good after the '60s or whatever, um, they're definitely worth checking out because they don't sound exactly like the Small Faces or the Beatles or whatever, but they kind of echo the spirit and sometimes the sound, and so I think you would like them. Anyway, yeah. So around '82, MTV came around in 1981 or so, but I remember we got it around '82, and cable and all. And I remember remember hearing Town Called Malice, like I said, on the radio several times that summer. I remember seeing a video for a song of theirs that came out in '82. So did Town Called Malice, but another song that came out was called Bitterest Pill I Ever Had to Swallow. Really liked that. And so it's kind of a shame because I think had they stuck around a little longer, they would have gotten more popularity in the United States. Because it kind of was MTV. A lot of bands without MTV probably would have never gone anywhere. And these bands aren't as good as the Jam or the Clash by any means, even though they're good bands. But like Culture Club and Duran Duran, they were kind of MTV made those bands, and a lot of others. The Clash kind of got their bump from MTV thanks to them playing Should I Stay or Should I Go and Rock the Casbah, even though they'd had a little success with London Calling a couple of years earlier. So, I mean, the Jam got a little bit of MTV play there, and then they broke up, so they didn't keep playing their videos, of course, and they were kind of forgotten in America if they were ever remembered at all, but which is, again, a shame because they were a great band. I mean, it's kind of funny to think now that you hear the Ramones on at sports, you're watching football or baseball on TV, they'll play Ramones music when they go to break. You'll hear them on commercials and stuff. It's kind of funny to remember that back when the Ramones were around, they really didn't get any radio play or have hits. That's their popularity. People knew who they were if you were into new wave and punk rock and stuff, and some people knew who they were, just hadn't heard of them. But a lot of people had heard them and not heard them. So that popularity kind of came later, and unfortunately, same thing never happened for the Jam, which is, because there's a lot of great music sitting out there. And it's kind of like the Kinks, too, but the Kinks at least had some initial initial success in America with "You Really Got Me" and those songs, and then they were kind of forgotten, and then they had a little bit of return to success with Lola, and then they kind of came back in the early '80s there with some success. The Jam never even got that close, unfortunately. But yeah, so for debut album, even though, like I said, this is not quite up to snuff with the debuts by the Clash and the Sex Pistols, it doesn't mean it's not good. It is actually a really good debut, and they would they would go on to do a lot better. But this is a good start. So we'll go through the songs. Everything on this album is written by Weller, with the exception of there's 2 cover songs that they do. So first song is Art School, and kind of singing "This is the New Art School." Great opener, really driving, energetic song. Uh, One of the highlights of the first side of the album. It's kind of the idea that punk, they didn't really call it new wave at '77. I think that didn't come along till that term till '78, '79. But punk, or this new music that was supposed to breathe new life into rock and roll, which had got pretty stale and cemented into place with a lot of sort of boring, kind of lost its zest that it had earlier in the '50s and '60s. You know, needed a kick in the balls, in other words. And that punk new wave was the new art school. There's a line in there that do what you want because this is the new art school. And kind of tie into the '60s is that if you read your '60s rock and roll history, you know that almost everybody and their dog in England went to art school back in the '50s. All those people that went on to become the Beatles. You know, Lennon went to art school, Jimmy Page, I think, Eric Clapton, I think Townsend did from The Who, and quite a few of those guys. And art school was sort of this where you, it was for the kids. The educational system in England is difficult to explain to Americans. It's saying I don't really understand it, it's different, but you test, or at least you did back then, and if you're really bright, you got to go to the London School of Economics or something like that, or you know, or if you're smart and rich, you got to go to Oxford or Cambridge, I guess. And if you're dumb, I guess they sent you off to learn how to fix washing machines or something. But the art school kids were basically the goof off kids who were bright but lazy or didn't take school too serious, so they went there to learn how to draw pictures and paint. And I think they basically just sat around and goofed off and played guitars and formed bands. Anyway, the idea being that punk rock is the new art school, that it's an anything goes and come in and do what you want, and creativity will follow and all, sort of like the Summer of Love Ideals, just with a punk rock twist on it, I guess. Great song anyway. So yeah, that's a good beginning to the album. Second song on side 1, I've Changed My Address, is kind of got a, almost sounds like a country-ish, country music opening for a few seconds before it takes off into sort of an energetic repeating riff motif there. It's got a really cool Who-like breakdown in the middle of the song with some feedback and guitars and the drums, kind of reminiscent of the early Who songs like Anyway, Anyhow, or Can't Explain, or My Generation. Again, it's not just a carbon copy of early Who. It's close at this point because they're still finding their feet, but it's enough of their own to make it worthwhile, to where it's not like, oh, that's just them imitating another band, and why listen to them when I could just listen to the Who instead. It's a worthwhile song. It's a pretty good one. Third song up, Slow Down, which was the Larry Williams song from 1958. And a lot of you will also probably know it better than the Williams version, is that the Beatles covered it in 1965, I believe. It might have been '64. So the Beatles version. The Jam do this. It's kind of the first snag on the album because it's a serviceable version of the song, but it's just that. It doesn't. The Beatles and the Larry Williams version are better, truth be told. So it's just sort of filler. It's a nice little cover, but nothing much to it. Uh, they go to fourth song is "I Get By in Time," another Weller original. Again, energetic and pumped up and driving song. It's a nice song. It's just sort of there. Not much to say about it, good or ill, but it's okay. The album side one ends with "Away from the Numbers." Probably the best song on side one of the album. That or Art School. Uh, and "Away from the Numbers" also, you hear the beginning of that patented jam sound to come. Maybe you hear a little bit of that in Art School, but "Away from the Numbers" is the first time on the album when you really get a sound of what they're going to become. It's a sound they would refine to superior results on subsequent singles and albums, but it's the beginning of it, and it sounds like what the jam would soon gel into. Really good song, and so that ends side one. Side one ends with the Batman theme, which we all know from the famous Batman and Robin show from the 60s. A song originally by Neil Hefti in 1966 as a theme for that TV show. Song that's been covered by The Who, The Kinks, The Ventures did it, Standells, The Marquettes. Gets played on the radio, and quite a few other people have covered that song. Richie Blackmore said that one of the Deep Purple songs, Space Driving, can't remember which song, but one of the Deep Purple songs was based on that riff of the old Batman song. And the Jams version is good. It's short and sweet. It's like 1 minute 31 seconds, so it's over before you know it. They do a good version of it. It's a little bit filler on the album. It's just a nice enough ending to side one, so I guess it's all right to be there. But it's kind of filler. It's probably better served. I don't know if they use this in their live shows at the time back in '77, but it probably worked better in a live context than it does as just a regular album track. I knew a local band in Fort Worth, back in high school days, and they used to play the Munsters theme when they'd start their second set and go from that right into All Day and All of the Night by the Kinks, and it really worked cool, the juxtaposition between those two songs. So it's good. It's a little bit of filler. So we get to side two. Side two starts with "In the City," the first single and the title of the album. And "In the City" is a great song. Like I said, it got to number 20 in the charts in England. It's kind of a My Generation. It doesn't sound like My Generation or The Kids Are Alright, but it's sort of the same themes, borrowing from there, sort of a celebration of youth and the possibilities of youth, and also the celebration and possibilities of the whole punk rock, which was new at the time, uh, you know, scene in music and revolution in music, or whatever you want to call it, and the change from the old guard to younger bands that didn't entirely work out the way people thought or hoped it would at the time, but they didn't know that yet at the time. So it's sort of a celebration of that, and there's a little bit about getting hassled by the man, hassled by the police, kids out having fun and that. But more than anything, it's a sort of an upbeat celebration of being young and having fun and running around. Great guitar, great sort of guitar. I'm not technical on guitar, I don't play it, but sliding feedback and sliding the neck down the microphone stand, and just a great anthemic song. And so a good start to side one. Then you get "Sounds of the Street," which is another good song. Uh, the song has a good melody and sound to it. Weller's vocals aren't always up to the challenge of what he's trying to sing. As a vocalist, Weller was good, but not great. He's no Brian Wilson or Paul McCartney or John Lennon. But then again, neither was Mick Jagger or Pete Townsend or Roger Daltrey. I mean, he's a good vocalist, and he got better. But and his vocals on this album are generally good. On this album, he kind of stretches a little bit. On this song, a good song, but nice sound to it, nice melody in that song. Number 3, "Nonstop Dancing." talking about hanging out with a great girl and dancing and having fun, and it's just a great groove, sort of a circular, driving, pounding groove to it. Really good song. So there you go. Where side one, you've got two really good songs. The rest of the stuff is okay. Slow Down is probably the weakest of the side one, even though it's not terrible. It's just sort of there. And Batman is sort of filler, not thriller. I'm not talking about Michael Jackson. But you got Away from Numbers and Art School. I've changed my address and I Get By in Time, or I Got By in Time, are good, but nothing stellar. So here we've got In the City, Sounds of the Street, and Nonstop Dancing. We got three really good songs here so far. Time for Truth is the fourth song. It's kind of the punk attitude, shouting out, and a little bit about the decline of the British Empire, that England was not the power it once used to be. If you want a better musical take on that, go see Arthur by the Kinks, 1969's best album and the best concept or rock opera album ever made, but that's we've already discussed that. So but as far as Time for Truth, I mean, it's good. It's it's you know, it's all right. Taking My Love is the fifth song. Really good circular guitar beat and groove to it. Nice song, just sounds really nice, upbeat and, you know, pulsating, and good rock and roll sped up song. It's a nice song. It's, Bricks and Mortar ends the album, which is sort of sadness of tearing down old buildings to build new shiny stuff, and the new shiny stuff is usually crap. You know, you got these old historic, which we have that in England. I mean, we have that in England now. We have that in America too, you know, where you tear down something cool and you put a damn Walmart or McDonald's in its place. Sort of that. And displacing people from their homes. It's that kind of what he's talking about there. But really good song. Got a great bit of kind of an auto-destruction breakdown in the middle of it that's very early Who-ish, like something out of my generation, toward the end of my generation or something. So there you go. You got a great side too. Taking Time for Truth, probably the weak link on side two, but even that's pretty good song. So there you go. The album, They Would Get Better really quick. Good album. The knock on it for me is that every song is sort of, they're fresh out of the gate. They want to prove themselves. It's their first album, I'm sure, is the reason. But every song is sort of upbeat and energetic and pounding, and there's some good hooks and some good melody and lyrics in here. But better would be to come. So every song, the songs don't sound the same, but they've all got the same sort of put it in drive and go beat or rhythm or pace, I guess. I'm not sure which word I'm trying to look for there. But so there's a little bit of a lack of diversity, and on subsequent albums they would do a lot better job of that, of having, you know, some slower songs, some faster songs, some different instruments brought in, some spice it up and change it around and do really good with working in a lot of different tempos and styles. That's not quite there yet. They're still sort of, like I said, finding their feet here. So it's not one of the greatest debuts of all time, but it's still a really good debut album and a good start. On a scale of 1 to 10, I think I would say somewhere between 7.75 and an 8, probably close to 7.75. They would, like I said, they would get better. And if you don't have anything by the Jam, or you're thinking of checking them out, this is an album worth getting in your collection at some point. It's probably not the album to start with. One of their subsequent albums would be the better entry point. And again, like I said before, if you're a 60s guy and you like the sort of British beat, English, Small Faces, Beatles, all that stuff, You're really going to love the Jam, I think. I'm almost positive. So check them out. That's the beginning of the Jam. They had 6 albums, like I said, and we will be back with album number 2 whenever I'm in the mood to do it. Have a good Saturday, everyone.